My mother-in-law stood in my kitchen and handed my husband divorce papers she had prepared herself. "You married a stray dog. Now throw her back on the street where she belongs." My husband didn't stop her. I folded the papers neatly and pulled out a folder I had been building for 2 years. 3 days later, she lost her son, her reputation, and her house in the same afternoon. My mother-in-law prepared the divorce papers herself, served them to him in front of me like a trophy, and waited for tears that never came, because 2 years ago I stopped being the woman they married and became the one who documented everything. My name is Cora Whitfield. I was 26 years old on the afternoon Diane Voss walked into my kitchen, set a manila envelope on my counter like she was paying a bill, and handed it to her son with both hands. The papers were real. She had found an attorney, a man named Gerald Finch whose office was 40 minutes outside of town, far enough that she thought I'd never find out, and she had paid him $1,400 to draft dissolution documents naming me as an abandoning spouse. Not violent. Not unfaithful. Abandoning. Like I was a dog who had wandered off a leash. My husband, Trevor, took the envelope. He turned it over once. He looked at me. He did not put it down. Diane was wearing a cream blouse pressed so flat it looked ironed onto her body. She had driven 40 minutes that Tuesday morning to do this, and she had dressed for it. Her voice was almost sweet when she said, "You married a stray dog. Now throw her back on the street where she belongs." The kitchen smelled like the coffee I had just made, dark roast, 2 cups, one for me and one for Trevor. The mug I had poured for him was still steaming on the counter beside his elbow. He didn't touch it. I picked up the envelope. I did not open it. I ran my thumb along the sealed edge once, feeling the ridge of dried glue, then I set it down again with both hands flat on the counter. Perfectly flat. I had been waiting for this moment for 2 years, and I was not going to let my hands shake through it. I crossed the kitchen, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and pulled out a manila folder of my own. Before I go any further, if this story is already sitting in your chest somewhere, hit that like button and subscribe. I read every single comment. Drop where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who's with me right now. Let me take you back 3 years before any of this started, to the first night Diane Voss decided I was a problem she needed to solve. Trevor and I had been together for 8 months the first time she said it out loud. We were at his parents' house for Sunday dinner, a ritual that happened every week without fail, at a table that seated 10 people even though only 4 of us ever sat there. I had made a peach cobbler from scratch because I wanted to do something right, wanted to bring something that wasn't just my presence, which I already understood was not entirely welcome. Diane had looked at the cobbler, then looked at me and said, "That's very sweet. Trevor prefers his mother's recipe, but the effort is noted." I was 23 years old. I laughed. Thought it was a joke. By the time we got engaged 6 months later, I understood it was not a joke. It was a system. Diane had a way of removing the floor from beneath you so smoothly that you didn't realize you were falling until you looked down. Every compliment had a trapdoor in it. Every gesture of warmth had a barb wired underneath. She told Trevor, the week after he proposed to me, that he was throwing away his potential on a woman who doesn't understand what she has. I was a paralegal at Mercer and Holt, a firm that handled civil litigation in our county. I had been there for 3 years at that point, had worked my way up from reception and was taking evening courses toward my certification. Diane referred to my job, when she referred to it at all, as your little filing work. She said it the way some people say, bless her heart, with a smile that means the opposite of kindness. I know now that this was the detail she never thought would matter. My little filing work. Trevor was not a cruel man. I want to say that plainly because it matters for understanding what came later. He was a man who had been raised by a woman who needed to be the loudest voice in every room, and he had learned, over 31 years, that the path of least resistance was silence. He loved me. He also did not stop her. Those two things existed at the same time, and for 2 years I told myself that love was enough to balance the other. The escalation came quietly, the way water rises before you notice it's at your knees. She called Trevor's cell phone 17 times in the 2 weeks after our wedding. Not our home phone. His cell. In the evenings after dinner, he would step outside and I would watch through the kitchen window as he stood on the back step with his phone pressed to his ear and his free hand in his pocket. I never asked what they talked about. I already knew. The calls were not about love. They were maintenance. She was running a system check. The moment I stopped enduring and started watching came on a Thursday in October, 14 months into our marriage. I had come home from work with a box of files I needed to finish reviewing. A property dispute between two families that had been tangled in county records for 11 years. And I found Diane sitting in my living room. Not the kitchen. Not the front porch. My living room, in the armchair by the window, with a cup of tea she had made herself from my cabinets. Trevor was at work. She had a key. She looked up when I came in and said, I was in the neighborhood. The drive from her house to ours was 22 minutes. I sat down across from her. I set my box of files on the coffee table. I said, Can I get you anything else? And she said, You could start by understanding that my son deserves better than what you're giving him. I did not ask what she meant. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and I stood at the sink for 45 seconds looking at the yard. And then I came back and sat down across from her and I said, Tell me what you mean by that. She didn't answer. She finished her tea. She left. That evening I opened a new folder on my laptop and I titled it simply with the date, October 14th. I wrote down what she had said, what time she had arrived, how long she had stayed, and the fact that she had entered my home using a key she had never been given permission to retain after the wedding. I made myself a rule. Every incident documented. Every date. Every word I could remember exactly. Every witness. What Diane did not know, what she had dismissed as irrelevant for years, was that my little filing work had taught me exactly how evidence is built. Not dramatically. Not all at once. One page at a time, dated correctly, filed in the right order, cross-referenced so that when the moment came, everything was already done. There was someone else at Mercer and Holt who knew what I was doing, though I had not told her directly. Her name was Audrey Ching, and she was a senior paralegal who had been at the firm for 19 years. She had watched me work. She had watched me change slowly and without explanation, from a woman who arrived flustered and left early to a woman who came in composed and stayed until the files were finished. He never asked why. He just watched. And one afternoon in the second year she left a printed article on my desk. A piece about civil harassment documentation standards in our state, with nothing written on it. No note. No explanation. I folded it and put it in my folder. The discovery happened on a Saturday morning in February, 11 months before Diane walked into my kitchen with those papers. Trevor had gone to help his father with something at the house. A leaking pipe, a fence post, one of those tasks that takes 4 hours because it involves two men standing in a yard talking more than working. I was home alone. I was not looking for anything. I was doing laundry. The pocket of Trevor's winter coat, the one he wore to his parents' house, the one he almost never wore anywhere else, had something stiff in it. I pulled it out thinking it was a receipt. It was a folded document handwritten on legal paper, dated September 9th. 11 months earlier, 3 weeks before our second anniversary. It was a promissory note. Diane had given Trevor $47,000, documented in her handwriting and signed by both of them, with a repayment schedule that listed our home address as collateral. Our home. The house Trevor and I had purchased together, that sat in both our names, that I had contributed $14,200 toward in down payment money I had saved since I was 19 years old. She had not told me. Trevor had not told me. The note had been drawn up quietly, handled quietly, filed away in the pocket of a coat he wore only to her house. I stood in the hallway with the document in my hands and I understood all at once what the filing cabinet had always felt in my hands at work. The weight of a thing that is real, that cannot be argued with, that exists regardless of what anyone says about it. I went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I didn't drink it. I set it on the counter and I looked at it for a long moment, and then I picked up my phone and I texted Audrey, I need to ask you something on Monday. She replied in 4 minutes, I'll have coffee ready. I put the promissory note in my folder. I went back to the laundry. When Trevor came home I asked him how the pipe went. He said fine. I nodded and made dinner. I did not confront him. Not then. I had 14 months of documentation and a handwritten promissory note using my house as collateral without my knowledge or consent. What I did not yet have was the rest of it. I gave myself 2 more months. I want to ask you something before this next part. Has someone in your own family ever made you feel invisible? Like no matter what you built, what you gave, what you sacrificed, it just wasn't enough for them? Write it in the comments. I want to read it. And hit that like button. Let me know you're still here with me. In those 2 months I did not change. I attended Sunday dinners. I brought food. I smiled when Diane spoke and I asked her questions about her garden and her book club and her sister in Phoenix. I sat beside Trevor at their table every week and I was, as far as anyone watching could see, the same woman I had always been. I was not the same woman. Audrey had introduced me, quietly and without ceremony, to a real estate attorney named Philip Osei who worked 3 floors above our office. I spent 2 lunch hours with him. I brought my folder. I brought the promissory note. I brought 14 months of dated documentation. He read through it at his desk with his coffee going cold beside his keyboard, and when he was done he looked at me over his glasses and said, "Where have you been keeping this?" I told him, "A drawer in my office behind the hanging files for the Beaumont property case." He said, "The promissory note is the problem for her. Not for you." In the state we lived in, a lien against jointly owned property required the signature of both title holders. Trevor's name was on the promissory note. Mine was not. Which meant the note, as written, was not legally enforceable against the property. What it was, however, was evidence of a unilateral attempt by one spouse to encumber a shared marital asset without the other spouse's knowledge or consent. That was a different matter entirely. The second thing Philip found, when he ran the county records on Diane's own property, was a discrepancy in the deed transfer she had made to herself from her late mother-in-law's estate 6 years earlier. A signature that had been witnessed by Gerald Finch. The same Gerald Finch who had drafted her divorce papers. I sat very still when Philip read that aloud. Philip said, "I'm going to need to make a call." I said, "I know." All the while Diane was performing beautifully. The Sunday before she came to my kitchen she had hosted a dinner for 11 people. Her sister visiting from Phoenix, 2 couples from her church, Trevor's cousin and his wife, Trevor and me. She had made her standing rib roast. She had told a story about a trip she and Trevor's father were planning to Italy in the fall. She had touched my shoulder twice, warmly, once when I arrived and once when I helped clear the plates. She was radiant. He was certain. She had already filed the papers with Gerald Finch that Thursday. What she did not know was that when she'd called Finch's office to confirm the filing, she had used the phone on her kitchen landline, a number that appeared 3 days later on a subpoena request that Philip had filed with the county clerk that same afternoon, opening a formal inquiry into the deed discrepancy. She had set the entire thing in motion herself, 4 days before she walked into my kitchen. She had expected that kitchen to be the end of it. I could see it in the way she stood, not tense, not braced for anything but arranged. Positioned. Like someone standing at the finish line of a race they are certain they have already won. Trevor was holding the envelope. I was holding my folder. I opened the folder and I placed 3 documents on the counter between us. The first was a certified copy of the promissory note Diane had signed with Trevor, with a legal annotation at the bottom in Philip's handwriting noting the absence of my signature and its implications under state marital property law. The second was a printout of the county deed records showing the discrepancy in the transfer from the estate, with Gerald Finch's witness signature circled in red pen. The third was a letter on Mercer and Holt letterhead, signed by the firm's senior partner, confirming that I had retained counsel and that all further communication regarding marital assets, including any filings initiated by parties outside the marriage, should be directed to the firm. I did not say anything. I let the 3 pieces of paper sit on the counter. Diane looked at them. She looked at Trevor. She looked back at the documents. Trevor set down the envelope. What happened to Diane's face was not dramatic. It was not a collapse. It was smaller than that. A specific kind of stillness that comes when a person realizes, without being told directly, that the version of reality they have been living in is not the version that the documents support. The color in her neck changed first. Then her hands, which had been at her sides, came up and crossed over her chest, not in defiance but in the way a person holds themselves when they are suddenly cold. She said, "Trevor." Trevor looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at his mother again. He said, "Mom, you need to go home." It was not a dramatic line. It was not a speech. It was 8 words in a flat voice from a man who had finally understood what he had been standing in the middle of for 3 years. Diane left. She did not take the envelope with her. I looked at Trevor across the kitchen and I said, simply and without any particular heat, "I stayed because I wanted to. I was always going to leave if I had to. I think you know which one this is." He nodded. He cried that night. We talked for 4 hours. It was not the end of us. It was, unexpectedly, the beginning of a different version. Audrey had made the call to the county clerk's office herself, 3 days after I told her what I'd found. Not because I asked her to, but because she had been watching the Finch name come across civil litigation files at Mercer and Holt for 11 years, and she knew what it meant when the same notary signature appeared on 2 unrelated estate transfers in the same county 6 years apart. She had her own folder. She had been waiting for a reason to open it. The inquiry into the deed transfer was concluded 5 months later. The transfer was ruled improper. The property, a lakefront parcel Diane had moved into her own name from her late mother-in-law's estate, was ordered back into probate for proper distribution among the estate's 4 remaining heirs, which included Trevor. Diane did not lose a house she had built. She lost a house she had taken. Gerald Finch surrendered his notary commission. He was not prosecuted, but he was finished in the county. The $47,000 promissory note was voided by a family court mediator as an improper encumbrance on marital property. The money was never repaid. The lien against our home was never valid to begin with. Trevor and I went to counseling. Real counseling, the kind where you sit across from someone for an hour and say the things you have been circling for years. We are still going. I do not know yet what we will look like on the other side of it. I know we are both trying to find out honestly, without performance, without anyone arranging the outcome in advance. What I built in that time, aside from the folder, was a small practice of my own. A paralegal consulting service that I registered as Whitfield Document Services in the spring of the year this all ended. Audrey joined me part-time 3 months in. We have 4 steady clients. The office is 1 room above a dry cleaner on Mercer Street, and the window looks out over a parking lot, which is not romantic, but it is mine. On the first morning I unlocked that door alone, I stood inside for a full minute before I turned on the light. I could smell the dry cleaner steam coming up through the floor, that warm, pressed linen smell. And I could hear the traffic outside, and I could feel, somewhere low in my sternum, a thing releasing that I had not even known was clenched. I had not beaten Diane. That is not the right word for it. I had simply refused to disappear on schedule, and when the moment came, I had the documents to prove it. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the small maker I had brought from home. I sat down at my desk. I opened my first file of the morning and I got to work. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story stayed with you, leave it a like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever had to draw a line with your own family? What did that cost you and what did it give you? I read every single comment. Take care of yourself. I mean that.